Welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hey there.
Hi,
How you doing?
I'm good.
We have, before we get into the topic, we are in the smoke advisory. So it's a good time to hunker down and work on
I
a
was going to
podcast.
say, when you asked me how I was going to say, yeah, good, except for the air quality because I live in rural Wisconsin and I'm used to normally having quite a good air quality. So I feel bad for the people in Canada, but I'm also feeling bad for me. I seem to be right in this corridor of smoke problems. But yep, so I'm indoors. I'm not going outside for a while.
That is riveting podcast. Right.
All right.
Okay, let's just jump straight to the topic.
You brought it up.
Yeah, and I
and you regret it. Okay.
Regret it.
All right. Yeah. What's our topic today?
So we're going to talk a little bit about communities.
Yeah.
And the concept of designing for centralized communities versus designing for decentralized communities.
This sounds very esoteric, but when we discussed it briefly the other day, it sounded a little less esoteric and more interesting.
I think it is both esoteric and interesting.
Okay. All right. I'll give you that.
Yeah. So a very short preface.
Yeah.
We design for communities sometimes, whether you're a UXer or a product person or society.
What do you mean by designing for communities?
So there are communities
in person or online.
In person or online, and sometimes sometimes organizations, institutions need to create things, create products, create spaces, create whether real or digital, create projects or spaces for those communities.
Right.
And
right. So sometimes you're purposely creating stuff for a particular community.
For example, a gym is designing for some sort of community, which is
people are coming together, they're working out, space,
right. Locker room, and then I guess, and the gym is sort of in the middle, right? Like the gym is like a very loose community,
right? It's not like I said, oh my God, I really want to be part of this group of people that goes and works out. I mean, I'm using the facility more than I am being part of the community.
Maybe so. Another version would be maybe a yoga studio where people are doing classes. The only thing that happens there
because sometimes at a gym they are coming together.
So a yoga studio then would be a very good sense of designing a space, physical space. For and a community. So you have a community that comes in. It doesn't have to be, communities don't have to be forever, right? It's like it's not like where you live. It's like that's your community. You can come in and out of these communities. So I am not, I sort of am loosely affiliated with this, the Thursday at 2 p.m. yoga community. But then when that time comes, I show up and I am part of that community. We all we have our little social structure. We have rules that we abide by.
There are like conferences or professional development. You might be a member of UXPA. That's another community.
No, but specifically when I go to my yoga class,
yes,
that's really when you
sort
of are
in the
community. So you've designed a yoga studio for that community.
Yes.
It's open because you need a lot of space. It has, maybe a microphone, it has lights, it has a changing room because part of the community standard is that, you need a place to change and shower afterwards. There's a certain standard for music and ambiance and lighting and all this kind of stuff. So we sometimes design for communities.
Yeah.
So there's two ways to design for communities.
Okay.
There is designing for centralized communities and designing for decentralized communities.
All right. What does that mean?
So a centralized community is going to be like that yoga studio. There's one community in there at a time, and it's run by the yoga instructor.
Okay.
So someone is in charge and is dictating all the rules of what happens in that space. Another example, if we look at a digital space, would be any tech platform, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook.
Okay.
These are centralized communities. So there is one, it's run by the company.
Right.
And the company, in accordance with local laws and stuff, but essentially they've designed the community so that they run it.
Yeah.
They have centralized control over moderating how people act, what people say, who is allowed in.
Yeah.
Right. You're not allowed in unless you have an account.
Right.
That you verify.
So this is all example of a centralized community.
Yeah. So you've designed for you've created a
centralized
what's
a decentralized community?
Well, I'll just quickly say the reason why would you design a centralized community? Do you have any pros and cons?
Let's see. Well, if I want to control it.
Yes, it gives the creator incredible control over every aspect of the space.
Right.
And if you are a company, it allows you to monetize every aspect.
And if I want to monetize it.
Exactly. Right. With great control comes great monetization.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah. If you have the people. But so that's that's why you'd create a centralized community. A decentralized community is one in which you're designing a space where different communities are going to be in that space at the same time. And the different communities will have different standards depending on the rules of that community. So can you think of an in-person example? I can. The best example I can think of is a public park. So a public park is a thing that was designed to have multiple communities in the park at the same time.
I'm going to argue with you about this, though.
Well, okay. So you have the kids playing at the playground, like a group of 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Right. You have the kids playing on the playground. You have someone that you have 2-3 people that are meeting for lunch sitting on a park bench.
Yeah, and each one of those little groups is its own little community.
Right. But here's my question for you, because in the definition you gave, you said that because in a public park, I mean, someone does own the park. Might be the city.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's owned and managed. You said that was centralized if it was owned and managed.
Well, but it's about the level of control. So, for example, the park, generally in most public parks, they have some general rules and guidelines. No tanks. You can't have wild elephants. You can't bring an elephant to the park.
Sometimes you can't camp out.
You can't camp out. Yeah, but being more realistic, the park closes at a certain time. You can't play loud music.
But you still consider this decentralized because...
Well, let's look at the individual communities. So what makes something a centralized community, in my kind of opinion, and that's it. It's not like a centralized or decentralized. It's a spectrum.
Ah, okay.
So there can be centralized communities where things are a little more lax.
All right.
But it's sort of like who sets the guidelines for that community, for that group. So for example, with the teenagers, the hooligans in the parking lot. They're swearing, they're, smoking cigarettes, they're doing provocative things, they're smashing bottles, maybe the park, you're not supposed to smash bottles, but they're sort of,
they have their own norms.
They have their own norms, right? And who's setting those community norms? They are. But at the same time, in that very same park, you have
the moms
sharing the space is the moms with the kids, the parents at playgrounds, the colleagues getting lunch,
and they have their own set of norms about what's okay and what's not okay.
Right, where so the toddlers have their own norms, running around screaming. Right,
it's very loud as the toddler in the park. Yeah.
Yes. Whereas if you had the business people eating lunch, running around screaming
is not going to be okay.
Not going to be okay.
All right. Well, now I have even
throwing
more
sand
questions
at people.
then.
So okay, but when you design a park, you are designing for decentralized. It's decentralized design. So you need to design a system where different groups of people can all use the same space and not annoy each other and not like fight each other. And how do they do that in the park? By making it very big and putting different things at different places so different types of people can sort of use that. I think we've lost Susan, so we'll have to pause. You back?
Yeah. Did you lose me or did I lose you?
I think I lost you.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. There's been weird tech stuff happening. Microsoft has been down. I don't know what's been going on.
All right, I have a question for you though.
Yes.
So in a situation like Facebook or YouTube or Reddit, centralized or decentralized? I mean,
definitely centralized.
But I can have Facebook groups and I can have Reddit conversations.
That's true. And they're different. There are different norms within that. So it's on the spectrum somewhere. I think they're trying to encourage some degree of decentralization in some capacity.
All right,
Reddit famously probably the most one. But everyone is still operating under the same terms of service, under the same guidelines that Facebook sets. And I would argue it's centralized because you can't just, if you want to take your Facebook group and be like, hey, let's switch to not Facebook, let's switch to Armbook,
LinkedIn or something.
You can't just press a button and move your whole group over.
Right.
So the group is inherently tied in to the platform, tied into the system. Right, whereas if you're at the park and you want to move your group
to go to a coffee shop,
you just go to a coffee shop. So that would be sort of more decentralized. All right,
so
you're 100% right. You can get into semantic arguments about.
So why are we talking about this? Who cares, Guthrie?
Well, I think there is a difference between designing decentralized systems and centralized systems. And so far, in most of the, I mean, it's a pendulum, right? You've been around for the internet to kind of swing back and forth with this kind of stuff.
You're implying I've been around a long time, aren't you?
Sure. Okay. And the right now, the pendulum is swung very far into centralization.
Are we talking digitally on the internet? You
digitally.
Mean? Okay.
And when we're talking about designing products, almost all the products are designed for centralization. Yeah. There's a login. You have all the user data in one spot, so you can mine it or do whatever. Monetize it. There are these huge dominant platforms. Everything's got to be on a platform. Yeah. And so people are very used to designing these sort of overbearing, centralized systems.
spaces.
And I think most of the UX designers out there, kind of in their head, they have that understanding. It's like, okay, I'm going to design for, I'm doing a design for a community, for a group. And their instinct is, okay, let's start with, that one big system that everyone's in, and we set the rules and every blah, 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 and you log in. And, another way of doing that would be maybe like a school, right? If you're taking it into a public space, a school. Okay, you have one main entrance and everyone has the same rules, and there's a principal who's running everything, and and there's different groups, there's different classes, and what may happen in the second graders may be different than the high schoolers, but really you're all in part of this one large contained system. And the principal can go around and give out detentions to whoever they want, because they're in charge. And it's just it's very, very different to design for decentralized systems. And there are some problems, especially in the digital space, with centralized systems. We talked about some of the benefits to the organization for setting up a centralized system. Can you think of any of the downsides?
To the organization? Or to the
users, either.
Disadvantages to the users in a centralized digital space. Yeah. That's what this. Yeah. Wow, you are really making me think here. I should have had more coffee before this particular episode. The disadvantages to the users in an online centralized space. Well,
I'll give you.
You want to give me a hint? Yeah.
It's something you talk about pretty often.
Oh no!
When you're talking about designing a user experience.
Oh, now you have me. I was about to just mumble something, but now I'm totally flummoxed. What?
You can't design for everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you have a centralized system,
yeah,
inherently
you're trying to design
for everyone, and in doing so,
you design for no one.
And that's exactly what happens in all of these centralized spaces that are designed for that. It turns out where some people want to push the boundaries, and then they say no, and other people say, well, you can't say no, and so then it just turns into like the moderators of the centralized system are the big bad guys, and they always make arbitrary rules that they don't really enforce, and they enforce kind of when they want to, and it just turns into a big mess.
You know what this reminds me of? It is a really interesting point. Why do we do this? Because we don't always design this way. So have you ever seen the ads from the Sears and Roebuck catalog from around 1917? Now, I wasn't around in 1917. Let's just make that clear.
I can sort of maybe vaguely
all right, so that. Sears and Roebuck, Sears Company, which I don't think is around anymore, right?
No. The kids do not know what Sears is.
Okay, so Sears was a big department store, a big store that sold it's called what?
Before they were a store, right?
Right. I'm going to go into that. So they were a store, and they were a department store, which is a term for a kind of store that sold kind of everything.
It's like Costco.
I don't know.
Except it wasn't big box, but
I've never been in a Costco.
Well, you have to have a membership, and there's not one near you. So
no, there's not. So anyway, Sears stores, you could buy all kinds of stuff. But before they had stores, they had catalog sales. So they were one of the first, which is a precursor to.
It was just Amazon,
internet retail. Yeah,
catalog.
It was a catalog. So instead of going online, you would get a little magazine in the mail.
It was not little.
It was like this big. It was big.
It was huge.
And and then you would order the things you wanted, not online, of course, because we're talking pre-internet. But the reason I'm bringing this up, so Sears was big, and Sears was probably at some point the major retailer in the U.S.
They were Amazon, where
Amazon
majority of whatever is
before
going
online.
Sears.
Yeah. So there's an ad. I actually physically saw, I think, a page for this ages ago. There was an ad for a motor. So you bought a motor, an electric motor, and then you could buy attachments. And the attachments would do things like mix your food in the kitchen, vacuum the rug in the living room. I mean, it was like a spray paint in the shop. It was like a motor. And then you attached things to it. And that was the assumption of how you would want to use a motor. Now, of course, that's not what stuck. What we ended up doing was putting motors in things.
Yeah.
And having specialized devices. So in a way, and I know this is like maybe not related to what you're talking about, but it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about. This idea, because in our history as humans, we've designed things as assuming, we've been able to make that transition to go from centralized, let's have a motor and stick on attachments, to decentralized, no, let's have specialized things for people to use and motors inside of each specialized thing. And yet, for some reason, when we're talking about setting up these social systems, we have a hard time thinking about them that way. We think we want to have
in the digital space. In the real world, that happens. The vast
in
majority
the digital space, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I know.
But
In
I
the
think
real
it's
world,
mainly
it's mostly
because of control and monetization.
For sure.
It's
And that's really all the modern ways that we use digital social media. That's the model for all of the modern ways. I feel like way back in like the 80s and 90s, I feel like it was more decentralized, but maybe that's not true.
For online social?
Yeah. Where like maybe that's not true.
No, I think it is true.
So for example, if you had a community, let's just say, that likes to collect coins, right now you'd have a Facebook group or a Reddit group or something in a Goliath, where you have a community within this centralized system where you have your community. I feel like back in the 80s and 90s, or maybe 2000s, before social media, you would instead have you would have like coincollectors.net. You would have a specialized community that was like, we're going to take our community and we're going to go off into our little corner. We're not going to be next to the cat group in the same system. We are our own system, decentralized. We are kind of so instead of being on Reddit and being a part of cats and being a part of coin collectors and being part of video games, you would go to coincollectors.net over here, and you go to like cutecats.com over there. You would just go to different systems and be part of the different groups in sort of a decentralized fashion. So it's not like it's never happened, but it's just it hasn't happened recently.
I think software followed the same trajectory.
Yes.
Like initially, when computers, when the personal computer came out, meaning it's, people had computers rather than, because there was a time when ordinary individuals did not interact with a computer. Computers were things that large corporations and the government had, and you as an individual never touched one.
Yeah.
And then the personal computer came out, and then everybody could have their own computer. But initially, a lot of the software, like there was no, Microsoft 365 or a collection of Google apps. There was, you wanted a word processor. That's what it was called, and you would go buy word processing software and install it on your computer, and that's all it did. and it wasn't connected to anything else. And then there was, you'd have a spreadsheet and you'd have this and you'd have that, and everything was very separate and had its own capability, and that's all it did. Now, I mean, there were advantages to that and disadvantages.
And there's a reason that so many that it has been funneled into these large platforms. The reasons being, platforms are large. They can give a lot. If you stay within the platform, there is a lot of value there. It's valuable to have Microsoft as a platform, and you have Excel and Word and Teams and email, and it's all sort of in one space, and you can search for the same files everywhere, and that's everyone's on the same Teams thing, and like there is sort of a value there, and it's also what the major players did, right? Like the money that got spent to making the best products, they were all centralized platforms. So we're just in a space of centralization right now, but the pendulum is swinging maybe back, perhaps.
You think?
Well, people are really, really sick of the social media spaces right now.
That's true.
And people are looking for answers, because there's been, since MySpace, into Tumblr and into Reddit and into Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and like all these giant social media, Snapchat, they have all struggled with how do we moderate everything. And if we say we don't moderate it, then the government of, whatever, some country says, no, you have to moderate it. So you have legal stuff to deal with, and they're trying to moderate, but also they kind of can't moderate. And it leads to friction, like, online communities, right? Like where you have two different types of communities and they're sharing the same space. Think of at the park where you take the parents and the children, and you take the teenagers smoking weed, and you put them
in the same space.
In like a very small little room together, and now you're up against each other, and now you have friction. So there is sometimes value to decentralization, to have different social norms for different groups of people. And no centralization social media platform yet has really figured out how to thread that needle. And maybe it can't be
possible.
I don't know. So what I want to do now, I have something here for you.
Go ahead.
I have a blog post.
Yeah.
About designing for decentralization.
Okay.
And I'm just going to read parts of it, and you can sort of give me you can sort of react to it, and we can, if there's anything in particular that you think's interesting, then we can talk from there. So this is from the Blue Sky team. Blue Sky is there is the guy who invented Twitter, left Twitter quite a while ago, but even before Elon bought Twitter. And he was now starting a new thing where Blue Sky is part of it. And his whole shtick is that the next wave of innovation is going to be in decentralized systems.
Who is this person?
Oh my God, I'm having such a brain fart. I can see him. Is it Jack?
Oh, Jack Dorsey?
Is it Jack Dorsey?
The guy who started Twitter.
Yes. Well, yes. So he's not technically the CEO, but he's sort
involved
of
in this.
Behind. I think he's the intellectual,
the brains behind
it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Jack Dorsey. So, and maybe he's right and maybe he's wrong. A lot of smart people have started interesting social media companies that couldn't compete against.
Don't go anywhere. Okay.
Well, Facebook and Google, they own them all.
Yeah.
I guess between Meta and Alphabet, really, those are their company names. They own all this, Snapchat's around, I guess. So, people, so maybe it'll just kind of go into the forest and nothing will happen. But so here we go. So the goal of Blue Sky is to turn social media into shared public commons. We don't want to own people's social graphs or communities. We want to be a tool that helps communities own and govern themselves. The reason we focus on communities is that for open commons to work, do you know what open commons is?
No.
Open commons is the idea of people being in the same space at the same time. So this is like a public park would be an open common.
Okay.
Where different types of people can be in the same place.
Okay.
There needs to be some sort of structure that protects the people who participate. Safety can't just be left up to each individual to deal with on their own. This puts the burden this puts on people, especially those who are most vulnerable, and this is in an online capacity, to online abuse and harassment is too high. And I do think this is true. If you talk to teenagers, the amount of online abuse that people experience is very high. Anyone who uses Twitter just experiences an incredible amount of online abuse on a constant basis. I don't know why they do it or put up with it. It sounds very terrible. But yeah, I mean, I don't, it's really nasty constantly. Okay, I go back to reading. It also doesn't mirror how things work in the real world. In the real world, we form groups and communities so that we can help each other. The tooling we're building for moderation tries to take into consideration how social spaces are formed and shaped through communities. So I'm gonna skip that. This part. Okay. Why build a public commons? There's a short message about they believe in a democratic society and there should be spaces that can be shared on public commons. A company is an efficient structure for building out a cohesive vision of how things should work, but locking users into our systems would be antithetical to our mission. An open commons can't be governed at the sole discretion of one global company. We offer services like professional moderators so that we can help protect people and provide a good experience, but we shouldn't exert total control over everyone's experience for all time with no alternative. Users should be able to walk away from us without walking away from their social lives. The reason we're building in decentralization is because we observe that business interests and the open web have a habit of coming into conflict. Third-party developers often get locked out. Moderation policies come into conflict with the diverse interests and needs of different groups of users. Ads push towards algorithms that optimize for engagement. It's a systemic problem that keeps playing out as centralized social media companies rise and fall. Does that any comments, questions? Should I continue?
Well, I could be very skeptical here.
No. I'm not asking you to not be skeptical.
Well, but what I'm wondering if what the real goal here is just to be absolved from responsibility.
So that's a good question. However, that is often how real world that is the answer that happens in real world communities. So, for example, if you were in a public park, right, there are certain rules like don't hit people, blah blah blah. And if there's a group of hooligans who run around and key someone's car, our instinct is not to blame the public park, but to call the police and find the perpetrators who did it. So absolving the park from responsibility is sort of inherent in a decentralized system. We are saying, yes, it is not up to you. We have a third-party moderator or something. Or let's take the public park analogy to reflect more of an online space. There's a group of teenagers, and one of the teenagers at the public park bullies another teenager in the public park. We don't think it's the public park's job, because the keying is a different example, because that's breaking a law or something, and that's just different. But this is a better example. So there's a teenagers in a public park, and one of them bullies another one. We wouldn't assume that it's the public park's duty to stop teenagers from bullying each other in a public park. There are other systems and communities that you need to be a part of to stop that problem. So building decentralized communities does exactly absolve you of responsibility. That's kind of the point.
Right. So that was my point, was that maybe there's, because I got the impression from what you read, it's like, oh, this is a wonderful idea and this will be good for you. But really, I'm wondering if, no, it's good for the organization so then they're absolved from all kinds of legal and everything else duties around having the space.
Yes, that is a big,
and
huge
if that's
difference.
mainly why they're opting for decentralization, not because of some highfalutin philosophical advantage.
Well, let's put a pin in that, because
Okay.
I think
Keep going.
that's okay, because that's a good point. And I think you are. It's sort of it's a little bit like, it's like decentralization might be the least worst option,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make it great. It's really just different. Like designing for a decentralized space, it doesn't inherently, you solve some of the problems of centralization, but then you have other problems, right? Which is, but I think part of the problem with designing a centralized space, in theory, it should be able to work better, but in practice, it never seems to. It just seems to make things even worse.
Centralized, you mean?
Yeah, like in theory, on
In theory,
Twitter,
it sounds
there's a
great. Oh, you
moderator.
have control it and you have a moderator, but then it
Yeah,
doesn't work.
and the company is going to make sure that people aren't getting
But then it
harassed.
doesn't
In
work.
practice, like there's
Doesn't
way
work.
more harassment, and now you can't leave. Now you're locked in the room
Right.
with the toddlers and the teenagers.
Right.
With no one else around, and you just have to deal with it. Okay, so I'll keep going. Some might think this isn't a big deal. Social media is like a club, and the place can be happening one day and dead the next. Would it be so bad if people just moved on to the next joint? The problem is that people put their lives and livelihoods into these networks. When a network shuts down, people lose out on a lot. They lose their connections, they lose their creative work, and they lose their places of business. Social networks are not just products, they've become digital homes. Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting issue. I mean, I know that, so, for example, I, like many other people, have stopped using or have closed accounts on some social media.
And you've probably opened accounts on others over the years.
Yes, but I mean, most recently, I've just dropped a couple of them, and I don't have a replacement for them, and haven't decided what to do about it. And being we have a business, and we have some of these groups or platforms were a major source of our connecting with people, and
we put a lot of effort, time and effort, not less than others, but still
less than others. But no,
time and effort
I mean,
to develop that.
I put a lot of effort over a long period of time to build a particular brand on a particular network, right? And on a particular platform, and grow that and have constant communication with people. And, then I've just stopped. So that's
sucky.
It's a big deal. And I haven't necessarily replaced it, I get that.
Okay. So you're going to buy that. All right, I'll continue. Even when things are working correctly on social platforms, there are weird dynamics caused by people's relationships being mediated by a single company. The internet is pretty obviously real life in the sense that its management has real-world consequences. When these places control our identities and our ability to connect and to make money, having no way out from the founding company is a precarious situation. The power difference is daunting. And then they talk a little bit about, there's a paragraph about the goal of Blue Sky is to rebuild social networks networking so that there's not a lock-in to the founding company, which is us. We can try to provide a cohesive, enjoyable experience, but there's always an exit. Users can move their accounts to other providers. Developers can run their own connected infrastructure. Creators can keep access to their audiences. We hope this helps break the cycle of social media companies coming into conflict with the open web. Okay, next section. What should this feel like? Social media has a reputation for being emotionally chaotic. Some days it can be fulfilling, and other days it can be a box of horrors. If we are going to succeed in our mission of creating social media that operates as a sustainable public commons, these tools need to not just be good in theory, but actually create a better social space than what has come before. Our goal for investing in moderation tooling and processes is to create a better public commons for conversations to take place in. Perhaps it can even be a happy, healthy, and predominantly enjoyable space. Here's some of what we think it takes to create a great experience. So I think this is sort of interesting because it's very sort of user focused. But a great experience should be simple to use. Oh, before I read this, I should just say, very easy to say this on paper, and the hard part is that so far, most social networks have not been able to thread the needle and actually figure this out. But I'll say what it says. A great experience should be simple to use. It shouldn't be overly complex, and there should be sensible defaults and well-run entry points. If things are going well, the average user shouldn't have to notice what parts are decentralized or how many layers have come together to determine what they see. However, if conflict arises, there should be easy levers for individuals and communities to pull so that they can reconfigure their experience. A great experience should...
I have no idea what that means.
Okay, fair enough. A great experience should recognize that toxicity is not driven only by bad actors. Good intentions can create runaway social behaviors that then create needless conflict. The network should include ways to down-regulate behaviors, not just amplify them. Down-regulate.
I have problems.
Do you know what down-regulate means?
I do, but I still have problems.
You have problems. A great experience should respect the burden that community management can place on people. Someone who sets out to help protect others can quickly find themselves responsible for a number of difficult choices. That's being like a moderator of some group. You would know. You were on a school board. She's for the podcast. She was nodding.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did nod. Yes, sorry.
It's audio. The tooling that's provided should take into account ways to help avoid burnout. A great experience should find a balance between creating friendly spaces and over-policing each other. The impulse to protect can sometimes degrade into nitpicking. We should drive towards norms that feel natural and easy to observe.
I think this is all impossible.
A great experience should reflect the diversity of views within the network. Decisions that are subjective should be configurable. Moderation should not force the network into a monoculture. Finally, a great experience should remember that social networking can be pleasant one day and harsh the next. There should be ways to react to sudden events or shifts in your mood. Sometimes you need a way to be online, but not be 100% available. So they are proposing that some of the barriers in social networks that we experience, such as the constant negativity, the fact that engagement is promoted at all costs, whether it's good or bad. Like in many ways, social networks, social media, the goal is to get people mad because
I know.
Because being mad that's engagement is engagement.
Yeah.
So the hypothesis that they are putting, if I could sum this all up, is that if you decentralize communities and you take it, you take the authority away from one central figure to drive engagement up, and to say, actually, we want engagement to go down. We don't want you to be able, if you are at the coins site, we don't want to push the cat site. We want you to just hang out and have an enjoyable, relaxing experience in the coin site. And that decentralization, designing for decentralized social spaces, is in fact the way that many of the problems of modern social media will be solved.
So if you're asking whether I would invest money, no. I'm not buying.
I'm just asking if you buy the idea
I don't
that
buy
decentralization fixing problems.
No, I don't. Okay. Because, can I say why?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question.
Oh, can I just sorry, before you say this?
Go ahead.
I should just briefly explain how Blue Sky theoretically works.
Okay.
So what they have developed is a protocol. So the analogy to think of is email.
Mm-hmm.
You can create your own server that can send and receive email, and you can send and receive email to other servers. Mm-hmm. So because they're all using the same protocol, they can all talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So imagine a world in which there's multiple Twitters. So there's Twitter, and there's Flitter, and there's Pitter,
and Quitter,
and and each of them have different rules. So if you're on, Pitter, they have very strong, guidelines about you can't say anything negative, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and there's all these rules, But if you're on Pitter, you can follow someone who's on Bitter over here, right? And you can kind of communicate across like email because you're all using the same platform. But if you're like, hey guys, like I'm fed up with Pitter. They're terrible. I don't like them anymore. You can just press a button and move your account and your entire following over to, Litter over here. Whatever it is, right? That's I just wanted to give you a sense of sort of in theory how it would all work, where there are different companies, different servers that are run independently, but because they're all using the same backbone, the same protocol, they can kind of communicate, and it feels like one.
Okay,
so that's sort of the.
All right, I have many comments. Many comments.
Right, so I just wanted to kind of make sure.
No, I appreciate you doing that. No, I appreciate you doing that. I have many comments. One comment is, I'm amazed at how many great words there are by rhyming with Twitter. I mean, who would have thought? Quitter, bitter,
Litter.
There's a lot of good.
Be careful with some of them.
Yeah. Okay. That's number one. Number two, it's an interesting idea, technically. Number three, it might solve a few problems, like being able to easily port everybody over to somewhere else. But basically, I don't think this solves these major problems that they, when they were talking about when they had the manifesto, right? Oh, we want this, we want that, we want this, we want that. I don't see how doing this is going to result in that, because all right, at the core, there are two issues going on, in my opinion. One is it's people, and humans are weird and messy and complicated and just get all goofed up around social norms and so on. So what is relaxing and healthy and enjoyable for me is possibly extremely different than what somebody else. So someone else really enjoys writing horrible stuff on social media and I mean, really, really, scary, icky stuff. And that is enjoyment to them, right? So we can talk about, oh, you should be able to be relaxed and enjoy. But what the heck does that mean? Different individuals have very different definitions of what relaxed, enjoyable, and healthy mean. Really different, that they might not even be aware of. So to me, you're dealing with humans, and humans are unfortunately complicated and messy, and especially if you're talking about social relationships between humans, really problematic. That's one. And then the other problem I have with all this is that when you have digital social spaces, as we do, the whole dynamic and the whole creating of social norms and everything else, it is inherently different. And it amplifies all the complicated parts of being human. It does. When you are limited by a particular space and by physically inhabiting a particular space, like going to a park, when you have physical limitations of how many places you can be and how many people you can interact with and be heard, okay, when I go to the park and I yell loudly, I can be heard by a certain number of people, but not millions, okay? It's just like even if I had a big speaker system and microphone, it's still not millions. So there are inherent limitations of interacting socially with people in physical spaces that are not there in online spaces.
So hold on. What if you went to Zitter, and Zitter has a rule that says anything you post, you can only have 20 followers at a time. And it's like, actually, you can't have large scale blasts of stuff. Like no post, as soon as a post gets to 500 views, it immediately is locked for 2 days or something.
But okay, fine. But then Pitter doesn't have those same rules. But who gets to decide what the rules are on Zitter?
Well, the people who are part of that community. So you
have
to find...
so then a bunch of people from Pitter come over to Zitter and say, oh, let's change the rule. I mean, it's just, it's not going to work.
Okay. All right. Well,
but they can prove me wrong. They can absolutely prove me wrong, but I just don't see how it's going to.
So I wanted to, so let's move away from Blue Sky. I want to take the last couple minutes here for you just to give your thoughts on the idea for designers, because it's sort of whenever designers are designing communities, I think we instantly just go towards the idea of centralization.
Yeah.
Do you think that designers should maybe think about, are there certain situations in which designing for decentralization might be wise or a useful tool?
Yeah, no, I do think that. I don't think it's going to solve
social media,
these social media issues. But I think in general, the question of seeing if we can undo some of the tendencies and habits that we've gotten into would be wise. And I love the idea of using, analogies. I mean, that's, if you study design thinking, one of the steps that I think people ignore in design thinking, one of the possible steps is analogous spaces and analogous situations. And to stop during your design and go, whoa, all right, what if, and I think this is one of those. It's like, okay, let's take a look at, we're designing this digital thing. How might we design it differently if, for instance, it was a public park, right? I mean, if we wanted to stop and think about how we might design it differently if it were decentralized, what does that mean, and what would it look like, and have we fallen into a centralization mental model, a conceptual model, without even realizing we fell into it, right? I mean, I've been in many meetings recently where someone on the design team says, well, maybe we should make it more like, the Creative Cloud Suite or Microsoft 365. And maybe that's a good idea, but maybe that's not a good idea, right? We kind of, these days, our analogies are all centralized spaces. And so, we may need to come up with a set of analogies that aren't centralized spaces.
What's the thought? It's like fighting yesterday's battles or something. So like right now, centralization is all the rage.
Yeah.
So if you're putting together some big product suite for 2-4 years from now, maybe by the time you do that, that'll seem sort of, because right now, yes, centralization works and makes lots of money and it gives you power. And what company doesn't want more power and money?
And more money, yeah.
But maybe competitors, maybe there might be a market demand for decentralization, for users to be like, hey, we actually want control.
Yeah.
So the question is, I mean, it's a little bit like the question is, can you get better results through centralization? Because is there some sort of monopolistic power efficiency?
There might be, but I think a different question is the benefits you get from centralization. Are they worth it compared to what you're losing?
And seeing as so many companies are switching to the big box providers for even for tech, right? Like we used to have our own servers. Well, we'll just use Amazon Web Services now.
Right.
And we'll just pay for it. And now we're locked in and blah, blah, blah. And we've, I mean, there is a cost to that. I know, think of 10, 20 years ago, think of all the people who were doing Ajax stuff for IE8. Remember, they developed these huge, all this software that could only be used for Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
And when that got phased out, so many companies had so many problems.
This happens, and it still happens. These things,
people don't think of that as part of the life cycle, right?
Right.
They're like, well, yeah, we had to spend $1 quadrillion redesigning every single
everything,
our core business services, but like that wasn't the cost of the development of services into a locked platform that we could never escape from, right? So it's like it's that like they don't count that in the example. So like we built literally everything into. I mean, Amazon Web Services will probably be around forever, but let's just assume, we built, I mean, Twitter's a good example, right? Twitter is, people are kind of leaving and I don't know what the deal is there, and maybe it'll turn around and maybe it won't, and maybe there'll be a competitor. So, you spend all this time and money, getting a huge Twitter following, and now you have to change platforms. And so what was really the cost of using Twitter? Well, it includes the cost of being in a locked system that then you have to change, but people don't include that in there.
I know. I like it. I agree. Well, Guthrie, thank you for this kind of interesting conversation.
Yeah,
you got me thinking.
We're done with our series. I wanted to
go do something
spicier.
Else. Yeah. All right.
I think it's an interesting paradigm to think about.
Yeah. I like it. You got me thinking.
I'm actually really rooting for decentralization just because I want something to work. Because all the social media is so terrible. I would like to have fun using social media. It would be pleasant.
I'm looking forward to you starting Mitter, Pitter, Litter.
I do have a Linux server
Quitter.
in my house, so I could I'll spin something up.
Sitter. Well, I could keep going. All right. All right. Let's see. We'll have to see what happens, and we'll see if I'm wrong or right that this solves things or not.
Just interesting. Just fun thoughts. All right. Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll talk to you soon.
Stay inside. Wear a mask.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Stay away from the smoke.
All right. Bye.
Bye.